Beyond gaslighting, why survivors of narcissistic abuse are not simply deceived, they are inverted. The misnomer of gaslighting. If you spend any time in the recovery space, you'll notice a pattern. Almost every survivor says, I was gaslit. It becomes the shorthand explanation for what happened in the relationship. A single word that carries a whole bundle of experiences: confusion, contradiction, denial, frustration, self doubt. It's easy to see why gaslighting promises a kind of clarity. It says, you were intact, they deceived you, you doubted yourself only because they manipulated reality. It's a comforting frame. It suggests abuse was external: lies, distortions, denials, and that once you learn to trust yourself again, you'll recover. But here's the problem: gaslighting doesn't even begin to capture what survivors of narcissistic abuse go through. Gaslighting is a psychopathic tactic, the deliberate manipulation of external facts in order to induce internal confusion. It belongs in the toolbox of someone who knows the truth and seeks to obscure it for advantage. It is the con man's trick, the sadist's sleight of hand, the abuser's lie repeated until you question your senses. Narcissistic abuse runs on something entirely different. Not a deception of facts, but a collapse of self. Survivors are not simply confused about what's true, they are absorbed into a fantasy that was never theirs. They didn't just doubt reality, they lose authorship of their own reality altogether. Gaslighting is too small a word. Gaslighting defined: the psychopathic frame. Let's be precise. The word gaslighting comes from Gaslight, a 1938 play and later a film where a husband manipulates his wife into doubting her sanity by dimming the gas lamps and denying the change. In its clinical sense, gaslighting means the manipulation of the external environment to distort another's internal perception. In psychodynamic terms, it is a tactic rooted in psychopathy, calculated, intentional, and aimed at control. The abuser knows the truth, denies the truth, and forces you into submission by distorting your ability to test reality. Gaslighting is external facts manipulated, internal perception distorted, survivor left doubting their senses. That is real. Many survivors of psychopathic abuse experience it. But narcissistic abuse is not psychopathy, even though traits overlap. Narcissism operates differently. It does not require external lies to distort you. It requires your compliance in entering a shared fantasy. The narcissist doesn't so much gaslight as they ensnare. They construct a shared fantasy where you become both partner and parent, lover and caretaker, an object within their internal world. Vaknin calls it snapshotting. The narcissist takes a mental picture of you early on, freezes you in that role, and then interacts not with you, but with that snapshot. Your reality ceases to matter. You are a prop in their internal theatre. This is not manipulation of external facts. It is the colonization of your inner world. MPIT, Mirrored Psychic Inversion Theory, builds on this by showing how the process unfolds structurally. From the very first contact, the narcissist installs you into their system. You are not met as a person, you are installed as an object. Through cold empathy, a scanning of your vulnerabilities, longings, and strength, they craft a fantasy where you and they appear as soulmates, perfect reflections. This isn't gaslighting. Gaslighting assumes you were still standing outside yourself, observing lies. What happens here is absorption. You stop observing and start participating in a fantasy where your own self becomes misrecognized and inverted. The moment of absorption. Survivors often describe the beginning in glowing terms. It felt like home. I'd never been seen like this before. We finished each other's sentences. The chemistry was overwhelming. What's really happening in these moments? Bidirectional object acquisition. The narcissist acquires you as an object within their fantasy, you longing for attachment Acquire them as the missing mirror of your idealized self. Lacan called it misrecognition. In the other's gaze, you see not them, but your longed for self. This is why love bombing feels so profound. You're not tricked into believing a lie about the world. You're being drawn into a fantasy that validates your deepest need for recognition. And crucially, you are compliant, not because you're weak, but because you're human. We are hardwired to seek libidinal connection, to fuse, to merge, to belong. Survivors do not fall for lies. They long for love, and the narcissist weaponizes that longing. The shadow, ASR, and the paranoid schizoid position. Here is where MPIT introduces something new: the annihilatory stress response, the ASR. Klein's paranoid schizoid position describes the infant's earliest states. Objects are split into all good or all bad. Annihilation is felt as imminent when the good object is absent. These are not memories we recall, these are imprints. MPIT reframes this as the ASR. When attachment is threatened, the body and psyche enter annihilatory panic. For the healthy child, maternal attunement builds bridges out of this state. For the narcissistically wounded, the bridges were faulty. When a survivor enters the narcissistic relationship, the ASR is reactivated. The shadow is stirred. The survivor's nervous system begins to supply absence as if absence were presence. This is the anticipatory shadow reflex, a preemptive inhabiting of abandonment managed by compliance with the shared fantasy. This is not gaslighting. Gaslighting never reaches your infantile annihilation. Narcissistic abuse does. Once the fantasy is running, the narcissist begins hypocathexis, withdrawing energy, cycling attention. Survivors feel it as hot, cold floods of affection followed by contempt or silence. What's happening beneath? The narcissist's bad object, their split off hated self, begins to seep through. Survivors, desperate to restore equilibrium, internalize it. They don't just believe lies, they begin to embody the narcissist's badness. Fairburn described this as the anti-libidinal ego, a persecutory internal voice that attacks the self. Empit maps this as the survivor's false protector, speaking in the narcissist tone. You're pathetic, you're weak, you deserve this. Gaslighting cannot explain why survivors start attacking themselves. Inversion does. Discard and the shattering gaze. The gaze collapse plus collapse-induced psychotic regression. Then comes the day of decathexis. The narcissist fully withdraws. The gaze turns cold. The libidinal circuit snaps. This is not the end of manipulation. It is the collapse of a regulating system. Survivors don't simply think they're lying to me. They feel annihilated. Their nervous system flatlines into panic and derealization. MPIT calls this gaze collapse. What follows is collapse-induced psychotic regression, CIPR. The ego shatters into parts: mute child, false self, redeemer, true self. Survivors feel like multiple cells pulling in different directions because they are. Gaslighting doesn't do this, only structural inversion does. Eventually, it leads on to IMRA. Post discard, the narcissist may be gone, but the survivors describe this as 24-hour loops of rumination, panic waves, trembling, depersonalization, a sense of captivity rather than grief. This is inverse mirrored reflexive apathy, the shared fantasy turned inward. Survivors are not confused by lies, they are sustaining a whole of mirrors that requires their own pain to function. Narcissistic abuse is not just gaslighting, it is a system of erasure.